This is The Weekly Set, the official podcast of TVEnthusiast.com. With your host, Tyson Gifford and William Roerick. Episode 144. Recorded February 16th, 2018. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Weekly Set, the official podcast of TVEnthusiast.com. I'm your host, the editor-in-chief of TV Enthusiast. My name is Tyson, and joining me today, as always, is my co-host and co-worker on TVE, William Roerick.
Hello.
So today, we are going to be covering a lot because we missed a week. Last week, unfortunately, this is on me, but my computer went down, so we couldn't do the podcast, unfortunately. But we don't want to fall behind and then be like behind a week on everything that we're doing. So we decided that this episode, we're going to be covering double episodes for our 3 shows, which also happens to bring our coverage of Black Mirror and Peaky Blinders, at least this season, to an end.
Yes.
So we're going to be covering episodes 5 and 6 of season 4 of Peaky Blinders, episodes 5 and 6 of season 3 of The Magicians, and episodes 5 and 6 of season 4 of Black Mirror, all in this episode. And we're going to kind of, outside of Black Mirror where they're separate, we're just going to kind of get through pretty quickly, I think, and just kind of address everything that happened and our reactions to the season as a whole, or, you know, in the case of Peaky Blinders, I guess. But let's get started with Peaky Blinders, season 4, episode 5 through season 4, episode 6, the end of the season. Yes. So we talked about in the last episode that it had ended with Michael supposedly going along with his mom's advice to just let the Changrettas family follow Tommy and murder him.
Following Tommy to an inevitable ambush.
Yeah, and we both knew, we're like, well, obviously they're not going to kill off Tommy, and Tommy seemed to have some idea that something was up, so he's clearly going to, lead them somewhere, and that's exactly what ended up happening.
Yeah, Tommy leads them into a trap, where he has the upper hand. He gets into a shootout with Changrettas and his men, and they're chasing him all through, this place, through an apartment building and all this stuff. And it's a pretty incredible sequence.
Yeah, it's a little surprising that apparently Tommy knew about this before he went there. I thought it would just be that he realized something was up and would lead him towards an advantageous situation. But instead, he had it completely planned out. He had machine guns planted around in this thing, knew exactly what he was doing, had it all worked out, but was the only one there. He didn't have any of his army, as he calls them, ready to jump in, which just seemed a little odd to me.
Right.
Strategically for Tommy, that he could have basically killed them all with the advantage he had at that point,
Yeah. It's not revealed till after the confrontation that was his plan all along. Right.
Which just kind of cheapened the whole thing. Because, when you think about it, it's okay, Tommy realized that something like this might happen, so he planted machine guns around his town and knew he could lead people into his own little mini ambush if he needed to. That's cool. That idea is cool, and that would have worked. But instead, it ended up being something else. And that ended up being a little weak. I felt, at least.
Right. No, I understand what I get what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's like, if it had been an unplanned thing, if he just realized something was up and then led him into an advantageous situation, I would have liked it. And that's what it felt like it was. But then it ended up not being that. It ended up being a plan. And then when you think of it as a plan, it doesn't really seem that well thought out.
Yeah. It just seemed like, through the series, they try to portray Tommy as clever, as really, really smart. And I think they managed to do that well for the most part. But here, it just seemed more ham-fisted.
And this is kind of going to be my mentality for the next episode too, which is that after Changrettas loses the opportunity, he goes to Alfie Solomons and says, "Hey, get us into this boxing match." And it's kind of a cool scene just because Alfie is just belittling them like crazy the whole time. It's funny watching Tom Hardy do that to them,
Tom Hardy's Alfie Solomons Solomons is always a joy to watch in this show because that's just a great character. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So it's cool with him just kind of like fucking with them and stuff the whole time. It's entertaining. But we were left with the idea of like, well, we didn't know if he was really selling them out or not. That takes us into the boxing match where this is going to be like this planned massacre. And not only did Alfie kind of go out of character with just kind of deliberately helping them without having any ulterior plan of his own.
Right.
Which is just kind of feels out of character for him. Like, it's in the same way Alfie's supposed to be clever like Tommy is, and neither one is really acting that clever.
Right.
Like, they're acting like they are clever, and then when you find out what their plan is, you're like, that wasn't very clever.
Yeah. Like the writers aren't doing like a very good job.
Yeah. It's all show, or it's all tell, no show. Like, they're telling us how brilliant they are, and they're not showing it.
Right.
Which again carries over to Tommy, because Arthur, just being in character, is just all amped at the idea of like just being suspicious of everyone, you know? Where like he'd normally be completely wrong, and Tommy's just kind of dismissing everything Arthur's saying. Yeah, whatever, just calm down, it's no big deal. And it's like, no, there've been a few things that Tommy, if you're clever, you should have realized something was up, you know? And like, yeah, Arthur,
like Alfie Solomon's visiting you to deliver some weird speech
and making a comment about how the big guy always wins, and like, you think that would be like a hint, you know, in the right direction. But no, Arthur ends up being the one that realizes something's up. But he would have just, even if something wasn't up, he would have probably acted exactly the same, because that's just in character for him.
Yeah, that's just in character for Arthur. Yeah.
Just
but what struck me about was Tommy's like complete dismissal of Arthur's like concerns was a bit out of character, you know.
Yeah.
Danger, Tommy was so self-assured that he was safe in that arena, you know, and I'm just like, but, you know, he got the weird speech from Alfie, you know,
Arthur kept addressing his suspicions, which were mostly crazy, but some of them were actually kind of accurate.
Like, I get Arthur was, you know, on drugs, too.
Yeah, but he did make some legit points, like these boxers aren't paying attention to, like, how the match is going. Like, they're clearly not boxing coaches.
Right.
And Tommy's just kind of dismissing that. It's like, no, it's fine. We already checked their penises and they're circumcised.
Yeah.
That means everything's fine, you know?
Everything's A-okay.
And this led to a situation in which Arthur dies, or at least we think he does. And then Tommy does an on-the-fly plan, which itself just isn't really even that smart. Like, faking, like, Arthur's death really doesn't affect the plan in any way.
Well, yeah.
Like, if you think about it, the way the plan progressed, like, it had no effect.
I'm not sure what...
The death fake was just like, kind of like, oh, you know, to get like the audience, us, to like go, oh, Arthur died, that's crazy. And then to go like, oh, he's back. That's like really the only effect it had. Like, it didn't have any effect strategically on what Tommy ended up deciding to do.
It was just an audience fake out, right?
Yeah, it had no real purpose. And that's kind of, I think, like, I feel like really let down by the way this ended, because,
from
a standpoint of, after, I mean, even with the idea that Arthur died, it would have only been Arthur that died out of the whole family that was supposed to be killed.
Tommy sends Michael to New York for something.
Yeah.
And then we find out why in the end. But again, it just feels like, okay, because he's like, oh, well, we got in touch with people from your rivals from New York and Chicago. And
they cited like real mobsters in history, like Al Capone.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and he cites that, but like, it's like, well, yeah, but that stuff happens off screen. So, you know, really the impact of it, you know.
And how big of a deal is it just to say like, oh, here, we're going to name somebody even bigger and we got them to be on our side. It's like, well, how did you get them to be on your side?
It doesn't have any weight right? Because, how did you get them on your side? Apparently, I don't know. He said, hey, you know,
be charmed by my British accent.
Be charmed by my British accent. There's no drama to it. There's no gravitas, because it just seems like a magic bullet to end the season, because they didn't really know how to resolve because they did, you know, what a lot of writers do is they wrote themselves into a corner with the situation where Tancredi, you know, was in a total victory position
Which itself was kind of like badly done too. Like he seemed like he was in a down position, and then all of a sudden he was in the victory position. It's like, what?
Yeah, like what? Yeah,
he's been losing men like crazy, and then they kill just Arthur, and like all of a sudden he's won everything. It's like, no. Like, why would Alfie just like leave? Like, like none of it made sense.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
If Alfie realized that they were going to take over, he would have killed them all. That's like what he would have done. It's out of character for him. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Alfie takes off, and then like Tancredi is like 100% going to win unless Tommy pulls a rabbit out of his ass, and then he does.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just okay. It's for the ending to the season, with the build up and stuff. It's a bit anticlimactic,
Yeah, it's a lamprey.
Yeah, it's a lamprey. It even makes like the ass pull even worse, because that's when it's revealed that Arthur is alive. Arthur is magically alive, and Tommy like announces that, oh well, we just fooled you into thinking Arthur was dead, so now Arthur's gonna kill Tancredi, and it's just like, okay, that makes it an even bigger ass pull.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just horribly let down by these last two episodes, because it seemed like we were excited at the end of the last episode going, oh, how's this gonna, and it just,
how's this gonna go
it wasn't clever at all. There was nothing clever about it. It was like, it was portrayed as if it was clever, and it wasn't. And that's infuriating. It's like, it's so frustrating when the director is telling you how clever it is, and you're seeing it and it's not clever. That's such an infuriating thing.
Right.
Like I said, it's a lamprey. It's like how we were told the whole time on The Magicians that the lamprey was this huge threat, and then it ended up just being like a worm.
Yeah, it ended up just being a worm defeated in like one episode. Yeah, exactly. It's anticlimactic.
Yeah,
because you're building things up, and then like your solution is like so dumb.
You're tearing us apart, Peaky Blinders.
You're tearing us apart.
Oh,
overall, despite the somewhat questionable writing, and I thought overall it was a strong season.
I think the setup for the season was good, and the payoff wasn't.
The setup was good. Everything leading up to the payoff was good. The payoff wasn't good. Acting still remained strong throughout from the cast, even with the bad writing at the end. The acting was still top notch, of course, because
top notch actors.
Yeah, because these are talented actors who could make the phone book riveting. So
Tom Hardy could make the phone book intimidating.
Oh yeah. Tom Hardy could just be Alfie Solomons and recite the phone book, and you'd get chills. You're like, damn, this is one slick.
Damn, Susie in Long Island with the phone number 845-7382 is that was some powerful stuff.
Oh yeah.
Let's move on from Peaky Blinders. That's the end of the season.
Well, you forgot the end where Tommy kills Alfie Solomons.
Yeah,
because Alfie basically forces him to do it because he reveals that he has cancer and that he's going to die anyway, and so he doesn't want to die from cancer. So he forces Tommy to do it for him.
Yeah, but still takes a shot at Tommy too.
Because Tommy wasn't going to do it. Tommy was going to try and talk him out of it or whatever. And
I didn't read that at all. I read it as Tommy wanted to shoot him face to face, and Alfie wouldn't turn around.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. No, you're right. I don't know why it's like, Tommy wanted to kill him, shoot him face to face, and Alfie didn't want to turn around.
And then when Alfie did turn around, he did it like shooting a gun at Tommy. And I don't know. I thought like it's a cool scene that's just like out of context. It's a cool scene.
And I don't know what was going on in the end with the PTSD and Tommy becoming a member of parliament and like making a deal with the government to infiltrate the Communist Party. That
was like a little like line plot going through, which if it's anything like this season, they'll finish it in the first like 2 minutes of the next season.
Right. I know like that whole thing was set up for season two, for the next season.
Yeah. So it's just kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's move on though. Let's talk about The Magicians.
Yes.
So I'm going to say right off the bat, the first episode of The Magicians that we're talking about here had one of my favorite like aspects of this season so far. Probably second favorite to the Penny episode, which is Quentin and Eliot growing old and dying together.
Yes,
I thought that was interesting.
So that was amazing. So yeah, they get the key. They open the gateway to Fillory through a clockwork, takes them to Fillory in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And Quentin remembers this part from Fillory where there's this mosaic that the girl there, I forgot her name, Chatwin.
Chatwin, yeah, the Chatwin daughter,
the Chatwin girl. She arrives to solve the mosaic and finds it's already been solved,
mm-hmm.
right? And Quentin deduces that they're in Fillory before that happens, at a time when the mosaic hasn't yet been solved. And he deduces that by the fact that they're constructing the spire still, or whatever. So Quentin quickly comes to the conclusion that they're the ones, Quentin and Eliot are the ones who solve the mosaic. Right.
And they do.
And they do.
It takes them an entire lifetime.
Takes them an entire lifetime, during which Quentin and Eliot grow close. Quentin has a wife, has a child who grows up to be a young man.
And I like the way this is portrayed with like Eliot just being part of the family too.
Right, and Eliot just being part of the family too, yeah.
It felt very natural. Like it felt very natural, and it felt very warm, and like, you know, it goes by very quickly as you're seeing these passages of time, and it's kind of like, oh wow, they're really advancing. Oh wow, they're like elderly now. You know, it's like, and you're going through, and it felt very organic. Like it felt like what it would have been like for these two characters. Like it didn't feel like, I'm glad they didn't try to play up some kind of like angle of Eliot being jealous or frustrated in the situation. I like the way it just, they had this organic relationship. I like it. I also like how they become reasonably frustrated with not being able to solve the mosaic, but they don't become angry or hopeless or, you know, anything super dramatic. They just keep at it, you know, and they just become resolved to the fact that this is the rest of their lives. That they're
this is the rest of their lives. And they actually, you know, around that mosaic, they actually, even though they spend their whole lives trying, they actually manage to live a good, full life. You can't say that the life they end up leading is in any way bad.
Oh yeah, Quentin has grandkids.
Yeah, Quentin has grandkids, you know. So
Eliot's part of the family too.
Elliot's part of the family.
Eliot even hooked up before that, and
yeah, Quentin and Eliot even hooked up before that. So like they live a good life around this mosaic. But then after Eliot dies from old age, and Quentin is pretty advanced in years himself at this point, Quentin is going to bury Eliot when he finds a golden tile buried underneath the ground. And it turns out that tile solves the mosaic and unlocks the key. And that's why it took them an entire lifetime to solve that mosaic, because the piece that they needed was buried underground the whole time.
Yeah, it was they had to create a picture depicting the beauty of life.
Yeah, depicting the beauty of life. And that
was the beauty of life, was the sequence in which those two grew old and died together.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're right. That was the beauty of life.
And so they went through the whole thing, and they did that, and then they were able to send that back. And I was a little nervous or not nervous, but a little like annoyed that they were kind of just undoing everything that they had just done there by having Margot just kind of like end up saving them before they even went through. But then they had the moment which made it all work, which is that they remembered. All of a sudden they remembered their past lives.
Right, they remembered, which I thought that was beautiful, because they could have easily retconned that and made it meaningless. But they found a way to where they didn't have to, and it's not rendered meaningless because Eliot, even though they don't know how, they have those memories, and you can see going into episode 6 that their relationship is different now, because they have those memories. They're much closer,
and they've matured both in separate ways.
In separate ways, yeah, and you see that in episode 6.
Yeah. So episode 6, most notably, I think, it introduces a new character portrayed by an actress who's very popular among fans of genre television, Felicia Day.
She pops up in a lot of genre TV.
Yeah, Felicia Day, you know. I think last time, very notably from like Supernatural, she had a big run on that.
She had a big run on Supernatural, yep.
Before that, I mean, she'd been in like, you know, Dollhouse. She was in Dr. Horrible's Single along blogs. She was on the Guild, was her own project that she had,
Yep, the Guild. She's in a lot of things, a lot of science fiction and fantasy TV shows she shows up in.
Yeah. So I was happy to see her pop up. This is like Quentin hunting for another key, going into the darkness, the abyss, in order to find the key, like an uncharted part of Fillory's map. And they go there, and we find out quickly, I mean, the key, like they rescue this girl out in the middle of the ocean, Felicia Day's character, like almost right away after like getting into this dark uncharted part of the thing.
Yeah, after they get in. And the whole time, the first thing I'm thinking, right, is, okay, so what's going on here? What's the catch? They find this girl. Is she a monster? Is she hiding something? Everything seems fine though at first, because it turns out she's from Earth. She's a student from Brakebills who managed to find
the key.
And she has the key, right? Of course, we know that every key has a special ability attached to it. It has some sort of power, so it's not immediately obvious what power this key has. But we find out.
Yeah. Basically, this key creates like a doppelganger of yourself that only you can see. The holder of the key can see. That basically is like getting into your head, because it's you, because it's part of you and it knows you. It's like getting your darkest thoughts and putting them out there, and it drives people to suicide is basically what it does. Which is a cool thing to lay on Quentin because of his backstory, starting from the very first episode of the series, that he's a rather unstable character, like, a person. He's prone to depression and anxiety, and he's been hospitalized for mental illness, before he realized he was a magician. So this is like worst case scenario for him, basically, put into this situation. And we see Felicia Day's character kind of trying to push the key on him, and he knows something's up. I think that they handled it in a way, though, that's not like the cliche way of like making her like a villain. Like, they don't really make her a villain, and they don't really make her a villain.
She's just kind of like, I don't know, like, she is like way too nonchalant about it. Like, to the point where, like, okay, you gotta think, like, if she actually gave a shit, she probably wouldn't, be so laissez-faire about putting this on to somebody else. Apparently she's already done this before.
Yeah.
And watch people
up a tolerance to the horror of what she does.
But she's, like you said, she's not really a villain. She's not rooting. It's not like she did it and she's rooting for Quentin to kill himself.
No, she's just desensitized.
She's just desensitized. She tells Quentin, "Oh, you're strong. You get through it, right?"
Quentin's like, "Well, actually, no."
she's kind of rooting for him to beat it without being much help, but. The sad twist is like, so basically what the key does is it creates an image of yourself that's like your dark thoughts, because it, when you're depressed, for people who don't understand mental depression, a lot of times it's like there's a voice in your head that, is constantly berating you, just berating you, reminding you of your failures and,
your follies, everything
your follies, everything you fall, and this is like an actual real thing for people with depression. This is actually what happens in your head, and I can imagine in the most extreme cases, it does lead to suicide. So this is kind of like what the key does is it takes the voice out of your head and makes it real. So in a way, and also way more aggressive, apparently. Right.
Yeah. In a much more aggressive way.
More aggressive way. Yeah.
and cause it's like, it's malevolent. It's not just, right. It's not just that thought in your head that nags at you. It's like, it's a malevolent process designed to break you. Designed
to push you over the edge.
What's sad here is that right after Quentin stumbles upon a solution to his problem, which he's so happy about, it's how quickly he's like, "Oh my God, this is perfect." He's like, "Tie me up to the mast," because the guy talked about how when, captains go mad, they tie them to the mast or something. He's like, "Oh, that's perfect." And his handler's like, "What do you, no, I can't do that." And he's like, "No, trust me, this is perfect. If I'm tied up to the mast, then I can't hurt myself and you can just get me back to Fillory and nobody suffers." years. And
unfortunately, what happens is because the girl that Quentin rescues isn't entirely a trustworthy person.
She's selfish.
She's selfish. Because she's a selfish person, and because Quentin kind of told her that the key also acts as a gateway to other worlds. Now she has a reason for having the key instead of just wanting to get rid of it, right? Mm-hmm. So once Quentin spills the beans about what else the key can do, she takes it from him, and Quentin, being tied up, can't do anything about it. So he gets his assistant to chase after her. And the sad thing is, like she escapes, but his assistant does get the key back.
Yeah, it's done in a really cool way because, like, he comes back to Quentin looking crestfallen, and he says, "I'm so sorry."
Well, the last thing we see of like, she decks him, right? Mm-hmm. And she gets away from him. And so, yeah, so he comes back and he's crestfallen and he says, "I'm sorry, like I failed." And
Quentin's like, "You didn't fail. We'll find another way."
And then you see him. He's holding the key.
Yeah,
yeah.
And that's when Quentin realizes the real problem, because the guy had talked to Quentin earlier about his own depression, and so you knew he was susceptible,
right?
And he ends up throwing himself off the boat and killing himself. Succumbing to the depression of the key, immediately gets eaten by a sea dragon, which is, I believe, pretty much the exact same CGI they used before when they showed a dragon last season. But,
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But hey, it's a sci-fi original. They got to cut corners where they can.
They got to cut corners. Yeah, exactly right.
It's still a good-looking dragon. It's
There's the other storyline where Julia and Alice are trying to do a magic exchange. They get the tail from an incubus, and they do the exchange. Alice obtains Julia's magic.
The incubus was great. Just they thought they were going to use his penis for the spell.
Yeah, they thought they were going to use his penis for a spell. He's like, and then they're like, "Yeah, but isn't your power based around sex?" And he's like, "No, I actually hate sex. Stress. I get my power from stress. Making people stressed gives off way more energy."
Look at Platinum Games.
Yeah, yeah. But there's a complication though, because shortly after Alice gets Julia's magic, she's talking to Penny, trying to make Penny a new body. When she goes into like some sort of bad seizure, and nobody else is around, and Penny, since he's in the state he's in, he can't do anything.
All he can do is make the fish sing.
All he can do is make the fish sing. I will survive, which is ironic for the situation. But it doesn't seem like anybody's around to hear the fish, so it looks like a pretty bad situation. But that's where we leave off with Alice's situation in doubt.
One other side we had with the storyline, another part was that Margot and Eliot were able to kind of uncover
part of the
fairies' plan.
So it looks like the fairies are trying to terraform the kingdom to be hospitable to them. It's noted that the fairies always have to be wet. They always have to be moisture. Like the fairy queen basically lives in that bathtub.
Yeah.
Practically, it's like, and they realize, oh yeah, the fairies need moisture. That's why they're growing all those mushrooms, right? And they also find out that some of these mushrooms are actually like fairy embryos. They're growing new fairies.
Yeah, they're growing an army, as they say.
As they say, yeah. So basically, it's a full scale invasion by the fairies.
Which they'd already kind of taken over it, but it's like it makes the threat much more immediate, because they're just trying to get magic back so they can fend off the fairies. But even if they do, how can they fend off like an army?
Well, it's bigger scale than I thought, because it's like, sure, they've took over the kingdom, the running of the kingdom, right? They got complete power over Eliot. And and they run the show from behind the scenes now, unless they can find a way to overthrow the Fairy Queen. But it's much more insidious than that, because it's not just that now. It's like they're growing an army, and the entirety of Fillory is going to be designed to support fairies, and it's going to be full of fairies, and nothing else is going to be able to survive in Fillory except for fairies by the time they're done with it.
Yeah. And so they uncover that part of the plan. I like that Eliot's like trying to contemplate the best move that they can make. He turns around and Margot's gone, and she comes running back holding a bunch of the eggs that Embry has.
And she's just like, hostages. And Eliot's like, what? That's insane.
I also like that they Margot was going to have to hook up with that prince.
Margot is in give no shits mode at this point.
Yeah. So she was going to have to hook up with that young prince who.
Oh yeah.
By the way, we didn't mention murdered.
We didn't matter. He murdered his brother, who she was supposed to marry.
Yeah.
Very, very gory. His head got chopped off. Margot got sprayed with blood. Very nasty business.
Like at their wedding vows.
At their wedding vows, yeah. Another red wedding.
But so she's supposed to be hooking up with this kid, and she just desperately doesn't want to do it.
Desperately doesn't want to do it. The Fairy Queen is insisting it happens. In fact, Fairy Queen basically enlisted Eliot to make sure that it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love Margot trying to dissuade the prince, like teaching him sex ed about like venereal diseases and talking about what was it, that she's on her period and she's gushing blood, and he's like I like blood.
Yeah, he's like, oh no, that bothers me as long as I get some action.
And he's like, I like blood. She's like, do you like teeth?
She's like, do you like teeth? Yeah, implying that vaginas have teeth in them.
And then I like that, they played into that because Eliot was able to drug the prince and knock him out.
Yeah.
And then when he came to, they basically pretended they'd already done the deed.
Well, Eliot puts like a fanged toad on him who apparently bites his junk. And then Margot, he wakes up, and Margot, basically they pretend they've already done the deed, and then that's his injured penis is proof of it.
So that was funny. Typical magician's humor.
Yeah, typical magician's humor.
But the main thing going on here, as we said, was the story of Quentin trying to find this key. And the way that ended, just to kind of lead into where that's going, is that they find out that the dragon that ate this poor guy that jumped off the boat, the dragon itself is a portal. That, like, the dragons don't poop. They ingest food, and that food literally goes through them to a different dimension. In this case, to the underworld.
Yes, so Quentin has to go to the underworld now to find the key.
Yeah, and so that's the magician.
Yes.
So we have 2 episodes of Black Mirror to talk about. Unlike the other ones, Black Mirror episodes are kind of separate entities, so we'll talk about those as separate things. So first up, let's start with Black Mirror Season 4, Episode 5, Metalhead. This one was directed by David Slade, who you guys might know as a director of episodes of like Hannibal, and he directed the movie 30 Days of Night and Hard Candy as well.
Basically, he's done a bunch of awesome stuff. Okay.
Yes. So he's a very good visual director. And that's what this episode stands out as, is a very good visual story. I mean, there's not a lot to talk about with it.
It's a thriller. It's a very intense thriller. It is pretty straightforward in its execution. I mean, there's not really a twist to it.
And it's an idea that we've covered before, which is the idea of like, robots killing us all. Like,
Except, this is pretty, except this is one of the scarier robot villains, because it's not humanized like the Terminator, right? So even the Terminator, like, is humanized a bit. This thing is like completely alien and doesn't have any goal except exterminating all life.
And it's shockingly similar to, Boston Dynamics. Big dog robot.
Yeah, it is. It's like a dog. It's like a dog style robot. And the one thing is, like, it's relentless. It goes after you and it won't stop. And it has all kinds of ways of like tracking you down. like all kinds of sense. Like it is filled to the brim with technology.
Yeah, it'll launch like shrapnel bombs that like embed tracking devices and horribly injure you at the same time, and then tracks you. It's brutal. It'll like pick up tools. It picks up a kitchen knife and doesn't just like stab with it, but it's like rotating it as it stabs, just like making a mess. It's not trying to be surgical. It's just trying to be destructive.
Yeah, it's just trying to be, exactly.
And that makes it like really scary as this thing is hunting this woman. Basically, to set up the initial premise is you have a team of survivors in what looks like a post-apocalyptic world.
They don't really explain the backstory or like how the world got fucked up. It's just fucked up.
Yeah, but and they're breaking into this old warehouse, abandoned warehouse. They're looking for what we find out is a teddy bear, apparently for some kid at their camp where there's some survivors. So they're on this mission to find this teddy bear. I guess this kid's been through a lot and they're trying to get him this one thing to kind of cheer him up or something. But along doing that, which they just think is like, okay, we'll just kind of break in here, grab this real quick and take off. They end up finding a sleeping dog robot thing that they immediately realize is like the worst possible scenario they could have found themselves in. In very short order, this robot murders everybody in this group except for the lead female, who manages to just kind of barely get away injured. And then the rest of the episode is this dog relentlessly hunting this woman.
Yes. Just relentlessly hunts her down until she's dead. Well, the thing is, like, you see early on, it has, like, sensors that shoots out of it that gets embedded into your skin.
Yeah,
you see it happen.
It's a shrapnel bomb with sensors in it.
It's a shrapnel bomb, and the shrapnel has sensors on it. It's really insidious. Basically, how the episode ends is she manages to get over on the robot, and she manages to kill it, but as it's dying, it shoots a shrapnel bomb at her, and it gets in her. A bunch of shrapnel gets in her, and when she goes to kind of dig it out, the sensors out, so that other robots aren't alerted to her presence, she finds one in her neck to where she can't remove it without killing herself.
And the episode basically just ends. She contacts her camp and says that she can't come back.
She's not going to make it back, and she kills herself rather than let the dogs do it.
Basically every location we've seen throughout the episode being scavenged by these robot dogs.
Yes.
They're like all over the place. Like they're where the teddy bears were in the factory. They're where, like, you know, one of their cards was knocked off the road and one of the people was killed. They're where the other dog was destroyed. They're just everywhere.
Right.
Like on the trail of this woman who's now already dead. But it's just like the idea is just how relentless it is, and how, like, the second she was marked, she was doomed. It was just like she was trying to kind of survive, and it's a really tense, like, you know, horror film, basically a short horror film. Yeah, but there's no twist.
There's no twist.
There's nothing else to it, really.
There's no lore. There's no backstory. Not the situation that they're in isn't explained.
There's no interesting like social warning about technology
but I really loved it as just sort of a horror thriller with a great visuals, great acting.
It's scary, it's tense, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
But it's just like there's not a lot to talk about.
There's not a lot. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, if you haven't watched it and you like that kind of stuff, it's a great, like, hour of television, basically. But it's not Black Mirror in the sense that you're gonna, like, think about it, you know? It's like there's not really much to think about beyond just what you're watching. There isn't a social commentary, really, or anything, you know?
Robot dogs are scurry.
Yeah. But one thing, if you have seen it or if you're gonna see it, check out some of the Boston Dynamic videos. I sent you a link, of a recent one.
Oh, that's right. You told me to watch that for a podcast. Dope. Oh, well.
They move, like, exactly like those dogs do. They kind of look like them a little bit. They're kind of like brighter colors, so they look a little different that way. But it's just it's always been creepy watching these Boston Dynamic videos of these, like, dogs, like these dog robot things that move a lot like, you know, dogs do, in the kind of, like, seemingly clumsy way. And that's kind of what these things are like. It's like this next next generation of that moves in a very animalistic way, where they move kind of with the intelligence of a human, the relentlessness of a machine, and the form of like a dog. And that's what like Metalhead's predicated on. It's what the whole premise is just how scary that kind of thing is. It's nothing really new. I mean, we've had this kind of thing since Terminator. You know, we make robots that kill us. Exactly. Kind of the plot, but it's a good tense episode. Let's move on though to the last episode of the season of Black Mirror, Black Museum, which this episode is really, it's kind of like 3 stories in one, or 4 stories, I guess, because with one of them kind of being parts of the other 2.
Well, there's an overarching story.
Yeah.
And then there's like the stories within the story. So basically,
it's how the Christmas special was. The Christmas special is very similar. It like laid out with a container story with stories within it. Basically,
it's like a season of Black Mirror inside of a season of Black Mirror, because it's 3 short stories. There is a lot of references to other episodes of Black Mirror. Won't really get into that.
Yeah, there's tons throughout. I mean, it's literally, there's a museum of like these technological horrors or something, and they're like, you can like see basically like every kind of prop in the museum is from like a Black Mirror episode. And there's other like even more direct references, including a character reading a comic book adaptation of 15 Million Merits, my favorite episode of Black Mirror. Character literally reading a comic book version of it, so that's in there. But the container story, a girl is driving her electric car, converted from like this classic car. She's charging it up, and then while she's charging it, she notices this museum.
She goes into this museum called the Black Museum.
And it's run by this guy,
this eccentric guy,
kind of like a mad scientist type, I guess, who's been involved in the development of a bunch of different technologies.
Basically,
so each story is kind of like a different, different progression.
It's all like sort of like biotech, like type stuff,
and they're all kind of relatively similar. Like what the technologies do are all kind of relatively like different, like levels of the same tech, basically.
Yeah, because it all has to do with basically consciousness, right?
Yeah.
So that's the focus.
So the first story, did you catch in like with the credits that the first story was based on a story by Penn Jillette?
Penn Jillette, yep. And I could tell by the nature of the story itself, because it is kind of like it is kind of like a hilariously fucked up thing Penn Jillette would come up with.
Basically, the first story is about
because it's completely
a doctor. Yeah, it's a doctor who he gets this implant that allows him to feel the pain of his patients, and in doing so, he can diagnose what's wrong with them, because patients aren't very good at explaining their own symptoms. But a trained doctor that knows what the symptoms mean and then can like feel that patient's pain and go like, oh, okay, I feel this pressure in my spine. I know exactly what this, as a doctor, I know exactly what this is. And it makes him more effective as a doctor. And this is a doctor that was kind of failing.
Yeah.
And he's given this chance, and it gives him this greater chance to be more. And he goes a bit over the top with it. He ends up at one point not willing to back out when he should. He goes through death with the patient.
Yes, he goes through death.
And in doing so, he becomes like this crazy, addicted to pain and death kind of guy that just like, you know, is like causing his patients to die so that he can experience it with them. Gets his medical license removed, and then he's like basically starts trying to like kill people.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, he becomes addicted to pain. He doesn't like jump right to killing people. Like he deliberately like tries to experience patients' pain for as long as he can. So he refuses to help them for as long as he can experience their pain. And then when that doesn't work, like he starts inflicting pain on himself, like pulling out his teeth and like just doing all kinds of, you know, cutting off his fingers. You know,
it's
just
body horror in like the sense of like The Fly, like Cronenberg's The Fly, you know?
Yeah, it's body horror. It's completely horrific. And then then he finds out that doesn't work because he needs a rush of adrenaline to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when he resorts to murdering people, but he doesn't get very far because his first attempted murder, he's like caught.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's kind of like, because he's just basically standing over the body, jacked into them, like, pleasuring himself.
Yeah.
While like experiencing it. And he's just like in the middle of like an alleyway,
He's just like in the middle of an alleyway and the police pull up and they're like, okay.
He's just like a junkie at that point. He's not like rational.
Yeah, he's not rational.
So that's the first story that's told to kind of set things up in this universe. And it's kind of like the least relevant of the three to like to the overarching story. It's just kind of like there, kind of. They could have probably even removed it and been fine. But it's a fun little piece of body horror.
I think I would have. I don't think I would have enjoyed the episode as much if they removed this story, because of the three stories, it is actually my favorite. So
my favorite was the next one, which is a story about a woman who's dying.
This one I thought was a bit goofy.
Well, her husband, while she's dying, her husband undergoes a procedure that basically implants her inside of him. Kind of, I guess it's most similar to, like, I always reference the Christmas special because it looks almost exactly like that kind of, how they're kind of like in this like dark cut off room and they're seeing it like they're watching a movie or something. That kind of perspective is very like how they did it in the Christmas special, but also you could compare it to like, not San Diego, the USS Callister, and the way that they were like implanted like a digital clone or something. And that's basically what it is. It's like a digital clone, except it's like instead of a clone, it's like an actual transfer of the consciousness or the memories.
Right, exactly.
But I mean, I could argue that that's still just a digital clone because it's just a copy, really,
Yeah.
But it's living inside this guy. So he's living, and at first it's working out. It's, she can experience the feeling of hugging their child and they can talk, but then it just gets to the idea of like having somebody in your head at all times. He chances to look at a girl's butt as she's walking by, and now he's getting chastised because she's in his head.
Right, exactly.
He can't have any moment of privacy to himself. So it goes from being this thing where it's like, normal, kind of like and happy, to like, he's just like, I'm just going to shut you off for a while without any thoughts. And he's like basically turning her off in his head for a period of time. And this happens at first, just like every so often when he's frustrated, and it'll just be for like a couple hours or something till he's cooled down and turned her back on. And then it gets to a point where it's like months have passed. And they end up trying to kind of work out a way around this, where, they have like these visitation times and all this stuff. But in all of this, he ends up like becoming attracted to a new neighbor that comes in. And through her involvement in his life and everything happening with that, and the wife not being able to deal with that, they end up making, without the wife's consent in any way, they take her out of his head and put it into a teddy bear that the boy can play with, and the teddy bear can basically communicate like in two ways. It can like ask for a hug, and then I forgot what else it could do. It did something else. It could say something, I can't remember what it was, but anyways, it basically that's all it can do. And then it can just like look out from the bear's eyes. Well, the kid gets the teddy bear and is told it's like, to hug it and think of his mom and everything. But what does a kid do after a while? Outgrows the teddy bear. So teddy bear just gets kind of like left behind. And the idea is just that, the wife has become like disposable.
Right, exactly. So life exists inside the teddy bear.
And we find out that the teddy bear itself is in the Black Museum, and she's still inside the teddy bear.
Oh yeah.
Still trapped. Now it's like a museum exhibit
based off of artifacts in the museum. So that's the artifact. That's the story around that artifact. Mm-hmm. And then we get to the most interesting artifact, which is a live hologram of a death row inmate.
This is a death row inmate that he signed a contract before he was going to be executed without really paying enough attention to it, with the guy saying he was going to help him, but ended up just using him as like a circus sideshow way of making money. And this ties into, did you ever watch the episode, I think it's called White Bear? There's a season 2 episode.
Nope.
That one was all about kind of crime and punishment and like society's perverse need for like justice, and like turning it into like something like a theater. So this is kind of a tie to that. But basically the idea is that there's like this inmate and he's like a holographic example of him that people can execute on demand over and over again and get their sick perverse thrills from it. And it goes from at first like something, okay, they can do it for a certain amount of time and then that's it. And it's basically like this guy's just being tortured over and over again. But eventually this whole thing has to kind of go underground because of the laws catching up with the technology, basically. And so when it goes underground, he ends up having to rely on deeper pockets, but from seedier people.
So basically, we're led to believe that this is that guy's consciousness, and again, it's similar to the digital clones in the first episode of the season, where like,
well, it's all like a progression. Like the first story is sensing pain, and the second is like embedding a consciousness in something, and the third is like creating a digital clone.
Yeah. So he's a digital clone. He's basically he's alive. And he's forced to relive his execution over and over and over again at the whim of the guests in the museum.
Mm-hmm.
And so the big reveal here is we find out the woman visiting the museum is actually his daughter, and she's come there to free him and also like get revenge for what has been done to him.
And this ends up happening along with like making her own little memento, as the guy had done before with using her father to make these little mementos where you get like this moment of time of the prisoner's suffering that you could have like on a keychain or, and carry it with you and laugh and enjoy the misery of this person. Well, now she's gotten the curator of the Black Museum. She has her own little keepsake and she takes it in her car with her and she takes the teddy bear with her because she knows this teddy bear has a consciousness and she's giving it its chance to have some sort of a life as well. And as she's pulling away, she kind of like makes a comment like she's talking to her mother, and we see inside her head that her mother's in her head. In the same way that the woman in the teddy bear used to be in her husband's head.
Right, exactly. So,
and that kind of ties it all together. What did you think of this episode as a whole?
I enjoyed it. It's probably one of my favorite episodes of the season.
I thought it was really campy.
I thought it was really campy, but that's part of its charm. That was its charm.
The curator himself is like,
also, come on,
super campy.
He had to be campy because it was invoking if you ever watch like those campy horror anthology shows like Tales from the Crypt, it was kind of doing its own take on that, a very Black Mirror take on that. But that's what they were invoking with it. That's the reason for the campiness. And I just thought it worked.
In that sense, I can agree with you also that like the second story, which I liked the most, felt the most out of place with the others, where I think that story almost would have worked better as its own Black Mirror episode.
Right.
Because that episode wasn't really campy. It is just really in the context of the rest.
I just thought, it wasn't in the context of the rest. I just thought there were several problems with it. Mainly, it was such an easy situation to not get into in the first place. Like that guy, like I could told him from the outset that would have been a bad idea to do that, but
I think it could have worked better as like that section could have worked better as like an hour-long episode on its own, where it could have been more fully developed and played out in a more kind of interesting way like that. And, there was a little bit of camp in that episode, and I felt it was almost like with the intention of fitting in with the other ones, that like if they had avoided that, it would have worked better as well, but not in the context of this episode, just in the context of its own.
Right.
But in the context of this episode, you need it there to show the evolution of this technology, I guess.
Right, because it's all progression of the same technology.
Yeah. So, that's there for it, I guess. And I think the most, tonally it's in place, but the first one is the most like, it's almost on its own, like where like the second episode plays into it because the mother is in the daughter's head, we find out in the container story, like in the second story. So that makes sense that it's integrated in there for that. And the third story, of course, is a direct connection to the container story. But the first story is like almost completely disconnected outside of the technology eventually leading to that. But like they could have like cut it out entirely and you wouldn't have missed anything in the plot, I don't think.
Right.
You might not have enjoyed it as much if you liked that part, but it was unnecessary to the plot, to the progression. But, it's like, I don't think I liked it that much. It was campy. It was fun in its own right. I think these last 2 seasons of Black Mirror have been a lot about kind of stretching the meaning of what it means to be a Black Mirror episode. And sometimes that works. Sometimes
they just want to do new things with the Black Mirror concept, and you're just not being open to it.
I just don't like it sometimes.
You're not being open to stretching the definition of Black Mirror. Your definition is very rigid.
Yeah, I like the format that Black Mirror was. I like that format. I don't think there's anything else like it on TV, and I think it's kind of losing its sense. So I think that's a lot of why I've been a little bit negative about these last 2 seasons of Black Mirror. Has come from that place. But, I mean, like I said, episode 5, Metalhead, great hour of TV, San Junipero, great hour of TV, but none of them really feel like Black Mirror to me. Neither of them have the same kind of like social commentary and gut punch. And, I guess the Metalhead has a gut punch just in the fact the whole episode's like a tense gut punch. Right. But it's not like a shock moment of a revelation kind of moment, it's not like that. And this episode, it's a little corny and stuff. And like I said, if this was a Tales to the Crypt episode, I'd like it, I think, in that regard. But as a Black Mirror episode, it's a little off-putting for me.
Right.
Still not bad, It's just that's the thing that's been with these seasons. It's just been like how Black Mirror it feels to me, or doesn't,
Right. This isn't Black Mirror enough, damn it.
Yeah, I knew Black Mirror when nobody knew Black Mirror.
Yeah, right. All right, so that's it for Black Mirror.
Yeah, and that's it for season 4 of Black Mirror and season 4 of Peaky Blinders. We're going to continue our discussions of the magicians week by week as we go on. As for the rest of our time, we'll fill in some other things. Next week, we're going to do a big summary of kind of other stuff we've missed out on talking about just because we've been talking about 3 shows, which is a lot, Week to week we've been talking about so many shows that there's a lot of shows that have kind of come up and gone since then. And so we'll kind of I'm going to bring some of those up and we'll just kind of quickly go over them. We won't go like in depth and talk about entire episode runs and stuff. We'll just kind of bring up the shows and talk about general impressions and what they're like on a few shows. Some of them Will's seen, some of them he hasn't. But they're all kind of like new shows that have come up in that time. So we'll be talking about that in addition to the magicians. And then I think the week after that, we're going to be doing our spring preview in addition to the magicians. And just to kind of make it more sane, since we're covering the spring preview and the magicians, we'll narrow it down to only a few shows we'll talk about coming up in spring that we're looking forward to, instead of going over everything. But until then, here's what's coming up in the week ahead. By the time since we're recording a day late here, it's already Friday, February 16th is when we recorded the episode. And on that day, Mozart in the Jungle came back to Amazon, Cardinal on Hulu, and Everything Sucks, which is kind of like a comedy about 90s nostalgia, it just hit Netflix. Yeah. Then on Sunday, February 18th, the Joel McHale Show with Joel McHale comes to Netflix. This is basically Talk Soup Netflix.
Yeah, so I'm super excited for that.
It's also week to week, which is interesting because Netflix doesn't do that much.
Well, Talk Soup, as a format, wouldn't work if it wasn't week to week because it was based off of talking about the talk shows, clips from talk shows that aired that week. You couldn't really do that
unless they covered talk shows on Netflix that were also being released.
Yeah, exactly.
We're like Netflix knew in advance that we have these episodes coming out.
Yeah,
that's like the only way it could have worked. Or they've covered not just talk shows and reality shows and stuff, but they've covered actual fiction shows and stuff too. So I could have seen them doing that with Netflix shows in that regard. But no, this is going to be week to week, which is good. It gives you kind of like a weekly check-in thing. And Netflix has been doing a little bit of that with some different things. They have that David Letterman show that's like that too. My next guest rest needs no introduction, where they've done 2 episodes so far, I think. One with Barack Obama and one with George Clooney, which is kind of interesting, and that's week to week as well.
Was that one show that was set in the 90s that we mentioned? I forgot.
Everything Sucks?
Everything Sucks, yeah. I like to point out, like, yeah, that's set in the 90s. That's high school set in the 90s, when at the time that I was actually going to high school, so that's
Me
nice.
too.
Yeah.
It's the same age range. So
Yeah.
It's going to be heavily aiming nostalgia at us. The question is it going to be like total flop nostalgia plays, or is it going to be like Stranger Things was for the 80s, but a comedy?
Right, exactly. We gotta see which way it leans.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
If it works or if it's just obnoxious.
If it works, because yeah, I'm going to tell if it's obnoxious. Like, yeah, if it's just like making 90s references left and right, I'm just going to be like,
so, hey, remember this?
look what I just got from my Sony PlayStation. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Remember CDs?
Remember CDs? Whoa. Yeah.
I've heard they make references to slap bracelets and all sorts of other 90s stuff, so.
Oh, check out my Tamagotchi collection. Yeah.
You hear about this new Pokemon game?
Yeah.
But then on Monday, February 19th, Star Wars Rebels returns, and X Company comes to Ovation. Then Tuesday, February 20th, The Frankenstein Chronicles comes to Netflix. Friday, February 23rd, 2018, The Tick is back on Amazon for its last, the second half of its first season.
Finally.
So that's probably, of everything on here, the thing I'm most excited about for this week. We'll talk about that. We'll do an episode basically on that. Probably that and The Magicians, since we're covering The Magicians for a while. We'll probably slip those together in like 3 weeks or something, maybe. I don't know. Whenever we're done and ready with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Marcel comes back to Netflix, and 7 Seconds comes to Netflix. So this is just, I mean, it's funny going over this, like looking at the schedule for this week, okay? So Friday, 1 show from Amazon, 1 from Hulu, 1 from Netflix. Sunday, 1 show from Netflix, 1 show from HBO. Monday, Disney XD and Ovation. Tuesday, Netflix. Friday, Amazon, Netflix. It's, this is the change we've been talking about for a while. It's like all Netflix.
Yeah.
It's like 50% Netflix of everything that's coming up.
Netflix is just producing more content than everybody else, They're like...
Yeah, they're just pushing it out like crazy. Sometimes, like I said, like 2-3 episodes a week. What we're talking about here of what's coming up is only kind of like the stuff that's somewhat in the direction of what we think our audience or we would enjoy. Like, I'm not counting all the different reality shows and children's programming and other stuff that's coming in. There's like a whole ton of that too.
Because obviously, like, not to generalize, I don't believe our audience listening to this would be interested in reality TV shows or children's shows.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're not worried about like the Mermaid Diaries or something.
Right.
It'd
be weird, because if you are, then I don't know why you would be listening to this podcast expecting us to mention it.
Well, Will, I routinely watch, YA preteen dramas about mermaids and then go straight into an episode of Black Mirror.
Yeah, that's true. It is a good change to Black Mirror.
Gets me real pumped up for those, that dark dystopia. But, yeah, so you can reach me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can reach Will. He is at Voxel Hero. And check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our site, TVEnthusiast.com. You can subscribe to the podcast through any major podcast client like iTunes or Pocket Cast. And the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel. You can find the links to that and everything on the TV Enthusiast website. So just kind of check that out, TVEnthusiast.com. So see you all next week. Tuning out.
Bye.
If you would like to voice your opinion, send an email to theweeklyset@TVEnthusiast.com. TV Enthusiast is a part of the Enthusiast Media Network. Stay tuned to TV Enthusiast and the Weekly Set podcast for more coverage.